Hey, DawgNation, happy Thursday. Although if I had to guess, maybe not quite such a happy Thursday, but nonetheless glad to have you here for DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans presented by Merriweather and Tharp. I'm Brandon Adams, and obviously a lot today on more bad news for Georgia. The injury situation yesterday involving Tyke Smith and Darnell Washington and the difference in what is being reported and what Kirby Smart is saying. We'll try to figure that out. I'm also going to spend some time today talking about the two distinctly different camps that Georgia fans kind of put themselves in over this. And I'm going to talk about what I think the real takeaway in terms of how Georgia fans interpret all of this. We'll try to do that. Our buddy Terence Edwards is going to stop by. We'll let Terence tell us about the situation as he perceives it involving his close associate, Eric Gilbert, and what's going on there. We'll cover all the bases. ESPN said something very interesting about JT Daniels. We'll talk about that on today's program. There is a lot to get to, and we're glad to have you with us for all of it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Merriweather and Tharp, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
By now you know the news, and we'll spend some time reacting to it. Obviously, Darnell Washington, Tyke Smith, dealing with some injuries here. The severity of those injuries depends on if you're talking to a reporter or if you're talking to the head coach himself, Kirby Smart. We'll dive more into that in a moment. Let me say it this way, though. You know, I'm a fan. We do the show from the perspective of a fan. I literally am someone who is happy when Georgia wins and disappointed when Georgia loses. I'm happy when there's good news for UGA, like let's say on the recruiting trail, and when there's news like what's gone on with the injury situation the last couple of days and really some of the player absent stuff, going back over the course of the last few weeks, Scott Cochran included, I guess, in that discussion. I'm obviously disappointed about that. That there is certainly a very large emotional component to being a fan. You're up here high when things are good. You kind of drop down low when things are not quite so good. That there is just clearly kind of a wave of emotion for the good and the bad that you ride as a sports fan. We like the show for that reason because we try to reflect that. We also like sports because it gives us a chance to feel those things. I think it's good to be able to do that. However, sometimes, though, I do think it's important when you're trying to analyze something to try to take the emotion out of it. Now, we feel the emotion. We're happy when good things happen. We're not so happy when bad things happen. But in terms of analyzing what's truly going on, pulling the emotion out of it probably makes the most sense. And so today on the show, that's what we're going to try to do. We're going to try to analyze what it means that Darnell Washington and Tyke Smith are dealing with injuries without being too happy, or too down about it, not being a Pollyanna that doesn't pay attention to the facts on this. We're going to just try to take the emotion out of it to the very best we possibly can. Let me give you the facts first, then we'll get to some opinions after that. I'm going to read this from something I guess Mike Griffith, DawgNation, posted a little earlier today. The Georgia defensive back Tyke Smith and Darnell Washington underwent surgery on Wednesday. DawgNation has learned, going to miss multiple weeks. Mike says the details of the players' surgical procedures have not been addressed by the University of Georgia, but there was a statement from Georgia coach Kirby Smart. And Smart's description here kind of runs counter to what Mike and other reporters before him had reported involving the severity of the Washington situation, the Tyke Smith situation. Kirby Smart certainly has a very different way of describing this and explaining all of that. And it's important to give his words on this. Let me show you the statement here from Georgia coach Kirby Smart. Kirby's saying that Darnell Washington and Tyke Smith sustained foot injuries during practice this week. They're both undergoing treatment and have an excellent prognosis, he says. Their status is day to day. Now, one of the things I got on Twitter from a bunch of folks was, well, BA, what does it mean that Kirby Smart's calling this day to day while a huge number of reporters are saying week to week? And listen, I'm going to let Kirby Smart's words speak for themselves on that, and I'm sure he'll be asked more about this the next time he talks to reporters on Saturday. I guess the one thing that I will point out is Kirby Smart doesn't typically release unplanned press statements for players who are fully healthy, right? The idea that, these guys are fine and they have an excellent prognosis, they're only day-to-day. That's not the typical reason that Kirby Smart would issue a press release. A little bit of breaking with normal custom for Smart to do that. So we'll let him explain more about his position on all this when he speaks on Saturday, but for right now, I don't have any reason to question the veracity of the reporting that's out there, including from Mike Griffith, that we're looking at a situation of a few weeks for Tyke Smith and Darnell Washington because of the injuries they've sustained there. And so in response to all that, here's what you're kind of left with. you're kind of left with two distinctly different camps among Georgia fans. On the one hand, you've got the very positive UGA fan who says, oh, that's okay, next man up, this is just, no big deal, nothing to worry about, Georgia's going to be fine. You've got that camp on the one side. On the other side, you've kind of got the season's over before it starts, typical Georgia, right? You've got, those two distinctly different camps, and I saw a lot of this on social media, including to the people who were responding to me yesterday. It's the everything is fine, next man up, versus the season's already over, typical Georgia, seems like we've been here before. Those just distinctly different camps. In fact, let me run through a few of these to kind of give you a little bit of a reflection from Georgia fans on the far one end, Georgia fans on the far other end, Georgia fan kind of in the middle. And, these three messages I'm going to read to you, I would say are fairly well encompassing the different subgroups that Georgia fans kind of put themselves in yesterday. Can we run through some of these here for a moment? GA Dog 2018 writes in to say, as I mentioned before, next man up. What is all the hype about all these great recruits if they aren't going to step up when needed? Man up, be a team player, take that position yourself. If you're a true dog, prove it. Now is the time to shine, he says. That's Georgia Dog 2018 on Twitter. Let me show you the next one here for a moment. Ronald, a guy who calls himself Ed OG on Twitter, says, this entire offseason, your show has been about predicting great things from this team due to its quarterback, the bevy of playmakers, and the skill positions. Well, BA, we're getting thin in that department right now. Nobody can deny that. He says great and, in parentheses, available playmakers predict success in college football. That's a little bit more of a realistic appraisal on this, and accidentally said the same one twice, but somebody else also said, this kind of thing seems to happen to Georgia virtually every single year. That's, virtually, kind of the situation that you kind of find yourself in. Georgia fans sort of on all sides of all of this. And listen, if you don't hear anything else that I say the rest of the day, I'm hopeful that you're kind of able to hear this. Whether it be the Georgia fan who kind of thinks the season's already done, the Georgia fan who thinks, man, we're really getting thin at the playmaking positions after some of the news that's broken out over the course of the last couple of weeks, or if you're the Georgia fan who says, next man up, elite recruiting classes stacked year after year after year, this is not going to be a problem. No matter which of those camps you find yourself in, the actual truth of the situation is that nothing about the recent collection of Georgia injuries or player absences, if you want to talk about Eric Gilbert here for a moment, none of that makes the upcoming season, including the season opener against Clemson, any easier to predict. It's not one of those things where you say, well, now that Georgia has these injuries, they're definitely not beating Clemson, and who knows what they're going to be able to do after that. Frankly, all of that is still just as much up in the air now as it was before. Now, that may not seem true today. Emotion on one side or the other may make you feel one thing or the next, but the truth is the game against Clemson was already very much in doubt before this injury news. It's a tough opponent. Anything can happen. And now that Georgia's dealt with these injuries, the same situation's kind of true. Let me give you a couple of recent examples from Georgia's past for a moment. Sometimes when injuries pile up, they do turn out to be pretty devastating. Last year in 2020 is a for instance on this. In the aftermath of the Kentucky game, it's Jordan Davis who's dealing with an injury. Richard LeCount who's dealing with a very serious situation. George Pickens was out, not able to play. And a lot of Georgia fans were left to say, man, these injuries are really piling up for UGA. This is probably going to be a real problem for Florida and maybe the rest of the season there as well. And it turns out, unfortunately, in that particular case, it kind of was true. All those injuries added together, adding the uncertainty at quarterback last season too, and that was kind of a lot for Georgia to overcome. In that particular instance, the common assumption the injuries would be bad for UGA turned out to be correct. However, that's not always the case. In 2017, Georgia lost its starting quarterback in the first game of the season, a former five-star Gatorade Player of the Year in Jacob Eason. And yet, in his stead, steps in Jake Fromm, who has one of the best freshman seasons that any Georgia quarterback has had, and obviously led Georgia to an SEC championship, a trip to the college football playoff along the way. That's kind of an unexpected positive to come out of what at face value seemed like a pretty negative injury situation. Go back to 2014 here for a moment there as well. Not initially related to injury, it was initially related to suspension, but when Todd Gurley was going to miss time for Georgia, there was this thought of, well, that's the end of Georgia's running game effectiveness. No Todd Gurley. Gurley is going to be a huge problem for UGA. But many of you are old enough to remember what happened after that, though. Nick Chubb stepped in for Todd Gurley as a freshman and went on to have arguably the best single season any Georgia running back has ever had, not named Herschel Walker. That sometimes injuries do work out to kind of be the way that you think they're going to be. And it does end up being a really bad thing for a team, especially when a lot of them pile up together. In other cases, teams have a way of just kind of shaking that off, and somebody who does step in, taking the next man up idea just that much further, sometimes that guy does step up there in that situation. And let me say one more thing about this. And, maybe this means something to you, maybe it doesn't. One of the things I'm always fascinated by are point spreads and gambling lines and the whole line of thought in the betting industry, because I think what it stands as a very strong check against whatever our emotional reaction for the positive or the negative might be for the team that we love. Gamblers, at least the good ones, have to eliminate all of that, and they have to have a much more level-headed view of things. And here's the thing you need to understand. That outside the bubble of DawgNation, outside people like me who obsess over this for a living, talking about it on the show, and many of you who obsess over this as kind of a hobby or a pastime, you love Georgia football, we all do, people who don't feel quite as connected to this, they're not obsessing over these Georgia injuries, even though they're kind of piling up. They're not obsessing over these as much as you might think, because you might think, some of you have even said this to me directly on Twitter, well, BA, now that Georgia's had all these injuries, there's no chance that Georgia's going to beat Clemson. But if that was really true, if it was really the case that Georgia had no chance to beat Clemson, then wouldn't the point spread reflect that for that game on September 4th against the Tigers? Wouldn't we already see some line movement in favor of UGA? I checked this before the show today. Our friends at BetUS, they currently have Clemson as a 3-point favorite over UGA. That's pretty much where it's been for most of the summer, although slightly higher. In some cases, 3.5, 4.5 at certain point in time. For right now, Clemson's just a 3-point favorite. Not a touchdown favorite. That might change, but it hasn't changed right now. Now, your response back to that might be to say, well, BA, these lines aren't moving right now. It's the summertime. The week of the game, Georgia's going to shoot up to a 7-point underdog or more. These injuries will factor in at that point in time, and Clemson will even be a bigger favorite than they are now. Maybe that's the case. Maybe that's what happens. But let me remind you this. When Miami and Alabama opened, when that line first opened, that's a week 1 game there as well, Alabama was about a 13-point favorite over Miami. But if you look to try to bet that game right now at BetUS or anywhere else that you might go, what you actually see now is Alabama's more like a 19-point favorite. That game went from like 13 to 14 to 15 to up to 16, then up to 18, and that's in a lot of places like kind of up to 19. That professional bettors, big money bettors, saw a line they thought was soft, Miami, not a big enough underdog there in that game, and they hammered Alabama on that point spread to the point now where the lines essentially moved 6 points in the direction of Alabama. So these early summer lines can move. There can be some movement. There just hasn't really been any yet for Georgia and Clemson. That Georgia was about a 3-point underdog or so before all this happened against Clemson. And in the aftermath of all these injuries, it's the same situation. Georgia, a slight underdog with still very much a chance to win. That doesn't seem true today because emotion kind of gets in the way, but it actually is true. The season for Georgia is still very difficult to predict. Georgia could run the table, win the national championship. Georgia could disappoint against Clemson and maybe fall short of its end-of-season goals there as well. Everything that was on the table for Georgia before all of this has happened remains on the table now. Has it gotten a little bit harder for those of us who are obsessed over this topic? It certainly seems like that's the case. But to the people who are viewing this from 10,000 feet above, really not all that much has changed. And in this particular case, paying attention to those who don't feel quite so much emotion about this, that actually might be a pretty smart thing to do. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp, and glad to have you with us no matter how you get to us today. Live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, on the page of DawgNation.com, right there at the top. That's a lot of fun on the DawgNation app now there as well. I told you guys we're going to be rolling out a bunch of new platforms, and I believe we're in, I think they call this beta testing. We're beta testing the show on the app. A lot of you like to do that, so a lot of your big consumers of our DawgNation app, so watching this show on the DawgNation app just seems like a reasonable next step, and we're happy to be able to do that with you here today. Of course, podcasts on all the platforms, Apple, Spotify, everything else. radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. Lots of ways for you to get in touch with us, and we're just happy that you are. And we couldn't do any of this. Nice studio, big streaming platforms, people to make it all work. We couldn't do this without those who make this show possible. Of course, you for tuning in each and every day, but also our friends at Meriwether and Tharp, our sponsor for today's show, your source for Georgia divorce. Now, some of y'all said on Monday when I was wearing the suit and tie that I looked like I ought to be working for Meriwether and Tharp. The good news is they are suited and booted every day, ready to do hard work for you. And maybe one of these days I can do some of that kind of stuff. For now, I'm going to sit here and talk football. But because, listen, the folks at Meriwether and Tharp, they're experts in their domain, which is handling your divorce situation. And the unfortunate fact is some of you are going through this, and the thing that and this is not up for dispute, that having a strong advocate on your side during that situation really matters to help explain how the law works for you or can work against you if you're not paying attention to what's going on. That's why you got to have somebody that's been through this kind of thing thousands of times before to help you with the financial implications, your family implications involving your children, of course, one of the most important things you'll ever have to go through, and you certainly want to make sure everything is all the way it's supposed to be when it comes to that. That's what Meriwether and Tharp can do for you. Go to theatlantadivorceteam.com. That's the website, theatlantadivorceteam.com. Take advantage of all their free resources. Set up your initial consultation, and then make that decision. Put them to work for you. Set yourself up so the next season of your life can be much more enjoyable. That's what my friends at Meriwether and Tharp can do for you. Your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com. All right, coming up in just a couple of minutes, we'll talk to Terence Edwards here on a Thursday. That is always a very important conversation for us because Terence got great insight on UGA. We will ask him today about someone that he obviously knows very well, someone that he's trained and worked with, someone that Terence has been a mentor for. That's the wide receiver at Georgia, pass-catching target, if you will, Eric Gilbert, the current situation with Gilbert from Terence's perspective. We'll let him tell us about that here coming up in a moment. Before that, though, I do want to go around the doghouse, and it's presented today by ServPro. And so what I said a moment ago was that the situation for Georgia hasn't changed as much as some fans think, that the season's actually not any easier to predict now than it was before. Game 1 against Clemson, even though it doesn't seem like that to a lot of people, it's not any easier to predict Week 1 against Clemson on September 4th than it was before. That the game was always going to be difficult for Georgia to win. It remains difficult for Georgia to win. Georgia's chances of winning the game haven't been greatly altered, even though the long list of injuries kind of pile up. No guarantee that Georgia will win, but certainly not a guarantee that Georgia wouldn't win. If it was, people would be lining up to bet Clemson, and as of right now, on the basis of the point spreads as we can see them, that's not really happening, and so that's important to point out. However, I don't want to downplay what has happened at Georgia over the course of the last couple of weeks. Certainly, and this is where the emotion creeps back in a little bit, that when bad news piles up, it's just hard to deal with. And it seems like there's been a lot of this lately, where it's like, the initial report is, everything's going to be fine, tiny little thing, no big deal, and then later on it's a re-upping of the reporting. No, actually, it's turned out it's probably a little bit more severe than was initially thought. It seems like there's been a lot of that lately too, which is kind of hard on some fans. I totally get all of that, but as we're around the doghouse here, presented by ServPro, I want to kind of see if I can lay out my opinion on this, and I'm actually curious what some of you think about this. When you look at some of the recent absences for Georgia, either because of injury or personal issues, whatever else, I've tried to rank the ones in terms of the impact on the field for Georgia, especially the beginning of the season, because you do play a perennial playoff team like Clemson. I've tried to rank the ones that I think kind of matter the most here for Georgia in the early going. Now, the names you're not going to see here, we can hold off on that one second. Let me just set this up. The names you're not going to see here are guys like George Pickens and Dominic Blaylock, guys who've been now gone for a while. And Blaylock, hopefully they, will be back at Georgia, at some point in time. But at the early portion of the season, not expected to be a factor. So some of the guys whose injuries were a little longer, certainly George Pickens especially, those names aren't factoring this discussion. These are recent developments for Georgia. And what I've done is I've tried to rank the absences for Georgia in the order of what matters the most, I believe, for Clemson. Believe it or not, Darnell Washington, Tyke Smith, big names, they actually don't rank at the top of my list. Let me show you what my list is, and this is just my opinion. You can make your own list, but as a way of having this conversation, here's how I rank them. Coming in at number 4 on the list, I have Eric Gilbert. Now, Eric Gilbert, from a talent standpoint, he may rank number 1 in the entirety of the Georgia roster, but given the fact that he just got to UGA, he's learning a new position, learning a new system, learning to be a part of a new team, we had said before that we thought there was going to be an acclimation process for Gilbert at UGA. In fact, even Terence Edwards, who knows Gilbert very well, has said in the past, hey, temper expectations early for a young man who's got a lot to learn. So we wish Gilbert well. We believe he'll be back at Georgia at some point in time. But while he's gone, we're going to rank him 4th on the list of current absences and how they impact UGA. Above that, we have Tyke Smith at number 3. Smith was obviously going to play a very specific role for Georgia. Georgia thin at the defensive back position. Smith played like an All-American a year ago. He was brought here for a reason, that is to be a plug-and-play starter. His absence for Georgia will be felt, but only number 3 on this list. At number 2, I have Darnell Washington. My reason for ranking Washington ahead of Smith and Gilbert is because you've heard me say this before, that I actually believe that Darnell Washington was likely to be, and we'll see how this injury prognosis changes all that, but prior to the injury, I had Washington as one of Georgia's 3 or 4 top pass catchers this season. I thought he was going to be, and we'll see if this changes, but my initial prognosis was that Washington was going to be one of the most important pass-catching targets for JT Daniels. So you have to acknowledge that things are getting more difficult for UGA if Washington's not available for a few weeks, as has been reported. So I'm actually going to rank the loss of Washington ahead of Tyke Smith and ahead of Eric Gilbert right now for what it means to UGA. But number 1 on my list for now, while he's not there, I actually have the injury that we were talking about, a week or so ago, and that's the center Warren Erickson. This, to me, of all the recent discussions we've had about who's not here, Erickson, to me, is the one that matters more than anything else. And the reasons why, I could obviously spout off my reasons, but I think it makes a lot more sense to hear Kirby Smart himself talking about the importance of the center position. My reasoning for ranking Erickson's absence ahead of the other guys is almost based solely on some of the stuff that Kirby Smart said last Saturday. Here is the UGA coach.
With Warren Erickson being out, we've worked Jamari and Van Pran both with the ones at center, which has allowed us to work other tackles. Roderick has worked at tackle with Jamari bumping inside some, and Truss has been able to work some at tackle and guard. Amarius has been able to work at tackle alongside Warren McClendon. Center is one of those positions that you can't play with. You better have a center because the play doesn't even get started without that. So Blasky has worked there. Jared Wilson's even worked there some. But primarily it's been Jamari and Van Pran as we work to get Warren back.
So apart from the names that are rotating, what Smart says there, center is one of those positions you don't want to play with, you don't want to mess with. It is in a lot of ways the engine that makes an offense run, or maybe better said, it's like the oil that makes the engine run as efficiently and smoothly as it possibly could. Center, a very important position, and so as we're making sense of all that's going on for UGA, I'd say finding that capable replacement for Erickson until he's back 100% healthy actually might rank ahead of the other guys, even though in cases like Darnell Washington and Eric Gilbert, you're talking about much higher rated recruits. I think the Erickson absence for Georgia right now might actually rank near the top of that list. It's around the doghouse. It's presented today by our friends at ServPro. And listen, if you're a homeowner, you want to make sure you know the name ServPro here, because one of the things that eventually you will deal with if you haven't dealt with before is some sort of damage. And it's commonly caused by like water intrusion or, in worst case scenario, sometimes fire, things like that. When you see your most important asset, something you probably have a stronger emotional connection to than anything else, your home, when you see that damage, that can be a really difficult thing to deal with. That's where my friends at ServPro can step in. Their restoration specialists can get that damage at your home back to new, literally like it never happened. That is what ServPro's been doing for a long time. Of course, all their franchises are independently owned and operated. It means you're doing business with someone who cares about their business and cares about your home. You're getting that personal touch. The service comes from that. So if fire or water damage strikes for you, you can call on ServPro to help you immediately. They will literally get you back to new like it never even happened. So check them out online. It's servpro.com. For those of you radio podcasts, let me spell this out for you. It's SERV, servpro.com. Great to have them as a part of Around the Doghouse with us here today. Great to have all of you with us here too. Before we're done, JT Daniels, ESPN has touted him in a very interesting way, and I'll tell you more about that. But for now, on the recent injuries at UGA, everything else going on around the program, always great to get a chance to talk to the terrific former Georgia wide receiver Terence Edwards, and good to have all of you with us here today on DawgNation Daily as well.
For From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Terence Edwards' opinion always means a lot to us because he's been on the field. He's done it at a very high level. He's working as a coach now, both at the high school level and as an individual coach level. Really, no one's closer to the game than someone like Terence. And so on days like this, in which Georgia's trying to sift through some bad news here, someone like Terence to provide some perspective, I think is incredibly valuable there. Terence, let me start with this, if you don't mind. When you have a Darnell Washington injury and a Tyke Smith injury to go along with, already a huge crop of Georgia receivers who are kind of on the mend here, some of them moving maybe a little bit more quickly in that regard than others, I think some fans are left to wonder, has Georgia done something to cause this? Has the way that Kirby Smart has led the program done something to cause this? Is there something that Georgia could have done, in other words, differently to prevent these kinds of things from happening more? You've played as a player, you've been hurt, you've recovered from injuries, you're around football all the time now. What do you say about this? Is this something that teams can do better at others than preventing, or is this just kind of the bad luck that sometimes shows up on a football team?
I just think it's the bad luck. I think I've been to practice plenty of times, and Kirby is not doing anything differently than any other college coach, high school coach, youth league coach is doing. He's working his players very hard, trying to get the best out of them every day. And you look at the Darnell Washington and the Tyke Smith, I think they have broken toes or whatever. So I don't know what you could do about that. Maybe someone stepped on their foot wrong. Maybe they cut wrong. It's just one of those things that happen. That's football.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that, we're not talking about, the kind of like tendon strength or anything like that. We're talking about a toe, and while I wasn't at practice, don't know what happened. It's very common this time of year as you're kind of getting your timing down and guys are getting used to playing together. Guys do get stepped on, and it stinks. It's bad luck. Luke Doty, the South Carolina quarterback, I'm pretty sure about this. Don't quote me on this, I guess. But I believe that his injury is also because of the fact that his foot got stepped on. I believe it was a quarterback center exchange. And I think he got stepped on, coming out of that, taking that snap. A big offensive lineman steps on you, that's going to hurt. And it can lead to a broken toe. Once again, I was at the Georgia practice. I can't give you an eyewitness account for how those toe things went down or foot things went down. But I have been around enough football to know that those kinds of things just sort of happen. And I don't know how you tell somebody, hey, don't go out there and step on somebody's foot, because the fact of the matter, Terence, and this, that's not what they're trying to do anyway. These are accidents, right? And you can't fully prevent that kind of thing from occurring, I don't think.
Oh, you can't. The only way you can prevent those if you don't practice. And that's not going to happen. Kirby is trying to take these guys to a level that they don't even know they have. I've been to practice, fast paces, upbeat. But that is no different than in the other college program right now that's trying to get the best out of their players. And stepping on someone's foot happens every play. I got my toenail kicked off for someone stepping on my foot, cutting wrong, and just jamming your feet on every play. That just happens. That's football. And I don't think there's anything any football coach in America could do to change that.
And I think you bring up a really good point, because let's face it, at the NFL right now, at least I'm told, I haven't been to an NFL practice in a couple of years, but what I'm told is these NFL teams now, in a lot of cases, almost aren't practicing, at least the way that we used to think of practice, and certainly the way you would compare it to the college level. NFL practices are a lot less physical than they used to be. But, Terence, in many cases, we're talking about guys in their late 20s or early 30s who've been around football for such a long time that they are fully trained, and maybe at that point they don't need practice. Julio Jones, I don't know when the last time he's even practiced was. It seems like it's been a long time, because by the time you get to a certain level of your professional career, you don't have to do that anymore maybe. But the college players, the 18, the 19-year-olds that we're talking about, they aren't as well developed as that. And so for some people, I do think they might say, well, all college teams just need to practice less hard because you don't want to risk these preseason injuries. But, Terence, I'm not sure you, me, or anybody else wants to watch the brand of football that would be televised on Saturdays from teams that are practicing less hard than they do now, because for most of these players, practice is where they get better, right?
Oh, most definitely. There's no college coach in America is going to take the role of the NFL layout. NFL has a PA, they have the union that negotiates what you can and can't do. And quite frankly, the NCAA only allows 20 hours a week, where the NFL is a job. So you have more meeting time, you have more walkthrough time, you just have more mental time to do, where the college is you honor a microscope and honor a time limit every week to get under. If you don't, it's a penalty. In the NFL, you can stay there all day if you need be. There's no time constraints to how long you can be at the facility. So, yes, the game has changed. I was speaking with someone yesterday about the difference in training camps when I played in the professional ranks and what they're doing now. And even when I was in the professional ranks, when I got later in my career, I didn't practice as much because I didn't need to.
Yeah.
I've been doing it for a long time. So, no, this is college football. This is what we sign up for, and it's never going to change.
I think that's really important. One of the things I tried to mention before you joined us was the idea that I don't know how much has really changed for Georgia because of these injuries and player absences and the things that have kind of piled up here, because the fact of the matter is Clemson week 1 was a very difficult game to predict before this. The season after that is actually somewhat difficult to predict, and I think that's still true even with these injuries, that most people kind of outside the bubble of where we're sitting in the heart of Dog Nation, they'll still think of Georgia as a championship contender. They'll still expect to see UGA very much, fighting for everything it has against Clemson. You can't say Georgia's definitely going to win that game, but these injuries also don't mean you can say that Georgia's definitely going to lose that game. I think the actual overall outlook for Georgia has actually probably changed less than some fans think, even with all this bad news that seems to be piling up. What do you make of that right now?
I just think, injuries are part of the game. And we got a opponent that is a worthy opponent in the first game, and I think a lot of Georgia fans are just ready for something good to happen to their Georgia football team. And I get it. I understand. But this is why we've been one of the hottest teams in the recruiting battles lately. We've been in the top 5 for the last how many years, so the next man's just going to have to step up. We recruit this guy, whoever that player is, for a reason, and we just got to be happy that Georgia and their coaches brought these players here for a specific reason, and that's to add depth, and they're talented players. Yes, they may not be as good as the player that is in front of them, but they're going to go in there. They're going to put the best 11 players on the field offensively, defensively, and special teams.
I'm sure you've been asked about this a million times in the last few days, but you spoke out the other day on social media in a message that I think a lot of folks took to be a reference to the fact that Eric Gilbert is away from Georgia right now, dealing what has been called a personal issue. And, Terence, I think the people in our audience, we're trying to strike the balance of, hey, let's give Gilbert the space that he needs to work through all of this, but there's also, just naturally speaking, a really good-natured, desire to, know what's going on there and to hear good news about him feeling better and maybe being on his way back to football at some point in time. I'm going to respect your relationship with him, but what can you tell us about what's going on with Gilbert right now?
Well, there's not much I can or will say on his situation that's going on right now, but just my biggest issue is with a lot of people in the Dog Nation just feel entitled to know what's going on with the young man. The young man is dealing with a situation, and it's none of anybody's business of what's going on. Coach Smart told everyone it's a personal issue, and I just wish people just don't feel entitled to know, because he is a Georgia player, feel entitled to know what's going on with this young man. The man needs your prayers and positivity. Doesn't need all the speculations and rumors that is just not true about the young man. And I have had to bite my tongue a few times this week on social media just because of a very select few fans. But all I just ask for everyone, just to pray for the young man. Yeah. And just whenever he's back, just let's cheer him on then. But other than that, all this other stuff is just how, he has a mother, he has a brother, has a grandmother. How do you think they feel about reading all this, knowing that their child is in desperate need of just prayer and positivity? And that bothered me a lot this week, and I was just ready to come on this week to just get that message out to people. Just send the man your love and prayers, and not all this other next man up crap. He's a person at the end of the day.
Yeah. No, I think that's very well said. And, Terence, you're an interesting person in these kinds of conversations because you're a former player. You're also very involved in the media there as well. And I'm sure it must be incredibly frustrating for you when you do see things reported. And this is not a new thing. There's been stuff over the course of the last few months that I think on this show we were pretty critical of because we just didn't really feel like there was any proof to justify some of the things that were being said. And because Gilbert has chosen to be somewhat private and, because he's kind of chosen to just kind of live his own life and not worry too much about what the media world may be saying about him, it almost seems like it gives license to certain people to just say whatever they want to say. And as someone like you kind of has a foot in two worlds, the world of a player, the world of someone in the media, I'm guessing that must be pretty frustrating for you at times.
It does. It does. Just being a player and just understanding, what we signed up for. And I get that. We signed up to be scrutinized. We signed up to be publicly talked about. But just in this type of situation, I just wish someone just had empathy and sympathy for a young man, even if it's Eric or anyone else, about a personal issue that he needs to take care of. His family is there with him. But we just don't need negativity and just anyone to write things that's not true about the young man when he's dealing with issues bigger than football.
No, I think that's well said, and your perspective on this certainly matters, and I know you'll pass along to him the fact that there's a lot of folks in Dog Nation really rooting for him to feel better again and get what he needs, whatever that might be. Obviously, he's going to be in the prayers of so many of us. Let me finish on a happy note before we go here. You had a great tweet the other day kind of shouting out a guy that you know well, Ladd McConkey, who seems to be earning some buzz here during this camp right now. And I just wondered if you'd spend just a quick second on that, because it sounds like a lot of guys working to try to earn what they can get as far as playing time. And it seems like McConkey may be one of those guys taking full advantage of his opportunity right now. I was hoping you might bring some of what you tweeted on the air here as far as some of what you're hearing about McConkey and some of what he's doing with the chance that he's got right now.
Like I tweeted yesterday, Ladd is going to have a role on this team. He really took advantage of Kearis Jackson being out with knee injury, so Dominique Blaylock is not being there right now fully in the full capacity. So Ladd is taking advantage of his opportunity. And I think a lot of people kind of rolled their eyes and wonder what Georgia was doing when they signed Ladd coming out, and I started working with him, and I was very impressed the first day. He's a natural catcher, and the word that comes out that Georgia locker room is he's tough and he's not scared of anybody. So he's going to go out there, and maybe it's the punt returner. I know he's doing a lot of work with the special teams, but I think he's going to have a role offensively at some point. Never think he's probably going to be the superstar, but he's going to be this very consistent player that's going to help Georgia win games and make plays one day.
Terence, great stuff. Thanks for being here. And, of course, you've done so much great work for so many players throughout the years, and you continue to do that right now. We got high school season getting going. Corky Kell last night, and games continuing now over the course of the next few days, really the next few months after that. For people who want to be better at their craft, catching footballs, how can they get in touch with you and get some of the personal training that you've been offering now for a number of years?
Oh, you can find me on all social media at Terence Edwards, Wide Receiver Academy. That's Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Terence, good stuff. Thanks for your insight here today, and we'll look forward to speaking to you soon.
Thanks, B.A.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, I think that's all really very well said by Terence Edwards. I think it's an important perspective. And, we say this all the time. And listen, it feels like I've said this a lot on the show lately that we got to operate on like parallel tracks, right? It's like on the one hand, this is a football show about a football team for fans of that team. And, most of the players and coaches that are part of this, most of the people who are watching, listening to us right now don't know personally. And so, their interest in all of this doesn't really extend beyond much the actual results on the field. And, that's just to a degree human nature. However, because college football is so unique, and this is one of the things that makes college football special. This isn't a professional athlete who lives in some gated community with a gate around the gate and then, that's totally inaccessible. Most of the guys who play college football went to a high school that you may have gone to. They grew up down the street from where you might have lived. And, these are not inaccessible people. I mean, there are a lot of people who are listening and watching us right now that when it comes to college football that actually do have some sort of connection. They do understand the players that put this uniform on, the coaches that put that uniform on. They are real people. And so when something comes up that's been described as a personal matter or a personal issue, I do think we have an obligation to kind of satisfy both sides of that discussion. On the one hand, fans want to know, what does this mean for my team? On the other hand, the person that's impacted is a real person with feelings and hopes and dreams and everything else. And when someone like Terence can help describe that, I think that's a pretty valuable aspect and all that. So I was glad he did that. Let me also just say this one more thing there as well, very quickly, and then we'll move on with our SEC through here. Terence also brings up something that's really important, that when you have the great recruiting success that Georgia's had, you create an opportunity where hopefully you can weather some of these kinds of injuries, the ones that we talked about yesterday with Tyke Smith and Darnell Washington. You're able to absorb them a little easier. I've said for years, the number one kind of idea I have about roster management is that numbers are more important than names. That if you have a large number of potential competitors for playing time, you can better weather the natural attrition that comes through football, because it is a violent sport where injuries do take place. That if you fall in love with one name and say, Tyke Smith, because he's a former All-American, he's going to come to Georgia to be the savior of the program, I think you're setting yourself up for disappointment when you obsess over a name. It's really about putting your faith in the numbers, the total number of potential playmakers in offense or strong contributors on defense. And if you have a large enough number, then you can survive the attrition that might come your way because of all of that. Let me give a quick shout out to my friends at Marco's Pizza. Heading towards the weekend, start thinking about great savings at Marco's. Good pizza at a great price. How about a large one-topping pizza right now for just $9.99? That's as good as it gets right there. You can use the Marco's app or marcos.com for all of that. 3 fresh signature cheeses, all the authentic toppings that go along with that. Pizza lovers get it. Of course, participation may vary and additional restrictions might apply, but check out the Marco's app or marcos.com for a lot more details on that. I thought that Nick Saban gave a very revealing interview to ESPN, which I think is pretty interesting, saying that he doesn't like the idea that conference champions could automatically get a bid into the college football playoff. He also says that it seems like to him that the college football world is heading towards a more NFL-type model. He tells ESPN that college football is for guys to get an education. The more we pay players, the less sports we're going to have. If we start paying players instead of having 21 sports, we're going to have 9. There will be no golf team, track team. Then you're eliminating opportunities for people in non-revenue sports. And I know that kind of old-fashioned viewpoint that college sports still serves the players that play it. That's not very fashionable right now. But I think that Saban is mostly right about that. He also talks about when it comes to Oklahoma and Texas being in the SEC, when you look at our league expanding, this is to ESPN once again, you're going to play more good teams in our league. You're going to have to lose more games. How does that affect people getting the playoff? It's a very important question. This, I think, is a welcome change or a needed change for college football. No matter what the current college football playoff selection committee says about valuing tough schedules, what they really value are pretty records. Teams that have 12-0 records or 11-1 records just get the benefit of the doubt regardless of the schedule they played, as long as they're playing in one of these main Power 5 leagues. And I think that Saban's opening the door here for what needs to be a more important conversation. That playing a tough schedule and winning some good games is more important than avoiding losses. And really, if I was kind of czar of college football, that's the way I think it should have always been. Count your good wins and don't necessarily obsess over the number of losses that you have. That's the way the NFL essentially works right now, right? It's like, you just got to have enough wins to get into the tournament, and then it's what you do after that matters. College football has always had this fetish over a 0 in the loss column or only a 1 in the loss column, and I think that's always been a setback for the sport. It's prevented teams from wanting to schedule as tough opponents as they could, and overall, I think the sport has suffered because of that. So I think that Saban's words right there are actually somewhat interesting. We'll move on with our SEC through here now and talk about a couple of other topics here for a moment. Speaking of Alabama, there's been a good bit of trolling the last couple of days. I want to show you this tweet from Alabama on the screen. It got some attention. The fact that they are releasing some tickets for a game in which the road opponent didn't buy up all the tickets they were supposed to buy. What Alabama says here on Twitter is, just released due to visiting team returns, tickets are now on sale for Alabama football's homecoming game against Tennessee on October 23rd. And, of course, a lot of Alabama fans were mocking Tennessee for not showing up for the game. Dan Wolken from USA Today said on Twitter that I know people's going to dunk on Tennessee fans for this, but honestly not going to Tuscaloosa to watch that game is probably the most rational thing Tennessee fans have done in a generation. Of course, Wilkins had a long-time feud with Tennessee fans because of some of Wolken's disgraceful reporting during the time in which John Curry was stepping down as Tennessee athletic director and Greg Schiano was almost hired. But nonetheless, Wolken weighing in on some of the situation there involving Tennessee not buying on tickets for Alabama. Listen, if you're Josh Heupel, and we talked about this yesterday on SEC Country Live, you've got to make this game matter again, right? I mean, and you got to pretend that it matters. And when Heupel's been asked about this before, he's essentially, basically pretended like that the Alabama game was just another game they were playing. Acknowledges it's a rivalry, but saying, hey, we're going to try to judge ourselves week to week and not on the basis of just one game. I understand why that sounds good to coaches, and that's the kind of coach speak that they, typically like to give you. But the truth is if Heupel's not more competitive against Alabama, he's going to get fired anyway. So you might as well acknowledge it. And if I was Heupel and I had a chance to speak through a microphone using the media to reach my fans, I think I might try to flex a little bit and say, hey, our goal is to make the third Saturday in October matter again. And listen, you can be honest and say it may not happen this year, but it's going to happen sooner than some of those folks in Tuscaloosa might think. And everybody will laugh at you. But the truth is, if you go out there and get your brains beaten, they're going to laugh at you anyway. So why not take that challenge head on? I think more coaches should do something like that. I don't think Heupel really is. It's one of the reasons why I question his outlook there as Tennessee coach, because you got to embrace the challenge. Otherwise, you're going to be in the same graveyard of coaches that Jeremy Pruitt and Butch Jones and Derek Dooley and guys like that are in. So interesting to see how Heupel handles all that. By the way, speaking of another first-year coach in a similar situation, and the media that covers that team not necessarily making it any easier. So where Philip Marshall, who covers Auburn for 24/7 Sports, has predicted that he thinks that Auburn will beat either Georgia or Alabama here in year one. And what's funny about that is to the average person, the Georgia part may sound easier because, Alabama's Alabama. But for Auburn, beating Alabama has been way easier than beating Georgia has been, as strangely as it might sound. The last two times Alabama's come to Jordan-Hare Stadium, they have lost that game. And Gus Malzahn, over the course of his tenure as Auburn coach, dating back to 2013, actually beat Alabama 3 times. By comparison, Auburn almost never beats Georgia. Did do it in 2017, but other than that, boy, you talk about the last, way before Gus Malzahn and everything else, there's just not a lot of success for Auburn against Georgia. So it's kind of funny, Philip Marshall writing some checks here that brand new coach Brian Harsin may have some difficulty cashing, but it also speaks to, remember we talked about the Athlon Sports College Football Preview magazine back in the summer, of folks saying that the lack of success against a team like Georgia, one of the main reasons Gus Malzahn's not there anymore. But the truth is, comparatively speaking, Brian Harsin would have to work really hard to even be as good against rivals as Malzahn was. Malzahn did beat Alabama in his first year as Auburn head coach, the Kick 6 game that everybody remembers from 2013. So once again, for a guy like Brian Harsin, a big, big challenge awaiting him, this year. And for a guy from Boise who's, not really all that well-versed in what the SEC culture is all about, you wonder how much of a culture shock this is going to be. The bar by Gus Malzahn is actually set a little higher than some people might realize. And by the way, the overall outlook for Auburn, very tough schedule. Their over-under is only about 6.5 right now. There are a lot of losable games in that schedule and a big challenge all the way around when it comes to Brian Harsin there at Auburn. We will make that your SEC through. And the time we have left here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp, I want to kind of circle back on what we talked about off the top of the program, but take a slightly different tact on this. So I've told you before that I actually don't think that the injury situation for Georgia necessarily impacts the end-of-season results as much as you might think. And I gave you examples of sometimes, like 2020, injuries piling up ends up to be as bad as you think it might. Other times in Georgia football history, recent Georgia football history, Georgia has been more easily able to overcome all that kind of stuff. And as I said a couple of minutes ago, that the numbers here in the program help you hopefully absorb that the total collection of the number of players in any position group is more important than the individual names. Georgia's just too big of a program to be saved by any one guy. And I think that all that really matters. But obviously for those people who are really into the weeds in all of this and really paying very close attention to the current state of Georgia football, you can't deny that on paper it seems like things have gotten a little harder because of the collection of injuries, including the 2 yesterday with Darnell Washington and Tyke Smith. So with that in mind, I do think that one of the ways in which Georgia can more easily absorb all of this is by getting the kind of year that you need from your quarterback, JT Daniels. As I said before, Georgia's a program is too big to be saved by any one guy, but football is one of those sports that puts outsized importance and influence on the quarterback position. And, when Joe Burrow does what he does for LSU in 2019, all of a sudden everybody has a better year because of that. And you got Jamar Chase was barely a top 100 recruit. He's winning the Biletnikoff Award. And, Justin Jefferson, who was a 3-star recruit, he's becoming a first-round pick. And, similar situation with Alabama a year ago, that when you get the big-time performance from your quarterback, all of a sudden a lot of other potential issues for your program, they're just obscured into the periphery because quarterback makes things run so well. Quarterback helps erase and disguise things that might not be perfect. And so with all that in mind, I thought it was interesting the other day, and Connor Riley wrote about this at DawgNation.com. You should read his story about this. But ESPN, and talking about the most important players of the upcoming season, the guy they ranked at the very top of that list was Georgia quarterback JT Daniels. Bill Conley was the writer. I want to read you a sentence that Conley writes about Daniels, and this is a good way for us to wrap up our program here today. He says, if Daniels turns small sample dominance, playing well last year in the 4 games he started, into large sample prowess, the Dogs have everything they need. Once again, that's Bill Conley from ESPN. Now, that last sentence, the Dogs have everything they need, was written before these injuries. But I don't believe it's any less true, right? I mean, I don't think that the outlook for Georgia is now greatly diminished, no matter how much we were looking forward to seeing a full season with Darnell Washington. The defense side of the ball, looking forward to seeing a full season's worth of Tyke Smith. Excited for a full season of Eric Gilbert. If JT Daniels is JT Daniels, all of a sudden these recent strings of bad news could seem like a distant memory by the time you get to December and January when the season's actually being decided. Now, the one thing I'll add to this is that Daniels' importance to me is only matched when it comes to the Georgia football conversation by Todd Monken, because a average offensive coordinator makes a great quarterback into an average quarterback. And a great offensive coordinator can make an average quarterback into a great quarterback. That no quarterback is really better than the system that he plays in. So if you're looking for how Georgia absorbs these injuries and these player absences and all the bad news that's occurred over the course of the last couple of weeks, look no further than Monken, the offense that he builds around JT Daniels, the guy that ESPN calls the most important player in college football. If Daniels is as good as he needs to be, then the number of guys who've gotten injured as of late, maybe that'll matter less by the time you get to the games later on this season that really matter the most. Let me also say this really quick before we get ready to wrap things up here today. Our friends at BetUS, you heard me talk about them a little earlier. And if you watch SEC Country Live, I talk about BetUS all the time. They've been doing this for more than 25 years. They are really the number one, online sports book in America. And one of the things that's made them that way are all of the players who keep coming back year after year because of the incentives and the perks that BetUS provides. And it's not just college football, although we're getting ready for that. It's it's all the sports that are going on. Preseason NFL and, of course, baseball down the stretch, UFC and everything else. And my encouragement to you is to take advantage of the great offer they have when you're a new player. You're going to get a big first deposit bonus of 125%. That means you put $100 in, they're going to give you an additional $125 on top of that as a big first-time deposit bonus. So make sure you take advantage of that. But here's how you got to do it. You got to go to betus.com. That's the website, betus.com, and use the promo code DN125 to take advantage of that offer. The DN, of course, stands for DawgNation, 125. DN125. Use that code at betus.com, and you can take advantage of that today. Good luck as you get your bets down. You can check out the Georgia-Clemson point spread that I talked about earlier in the show when you go to the website, betus.com. But use the promo code DN125 to get a big 125% bonus on that initial deposit. All right, let's wrap it up here today, and we'll do so with our Gator Hater roll call. And as we sometimes do, our golden shoe just kind of ends up being whatever it needs to be. Quick backstory on this. So last Thursday, we did Cover 4 live, and Connor Riley, one of our DawgNation colleagues, was eating dinner during the show. Now, not everybody likes to see people eating on camera or whatever else, and so some of our audience was kind of giving Connor a hard time about that, and they also understand that one of our great sponsors, Marco's Pizza, was a part of what we do here. And so some folks kind of got together and said, hey, maybe we need to kind of show Connor some love by also connecting to one of our great sponsors. So let me show you this on Twitter. This was really funny. UGA Vidal Fan 05 gives you the Connor eating the pizza from last Thursday with the Marco's Pizza location in the background. This is really well done. Very funny for a Golden Shoe Award winner today. Great job there. By the way, speaking of the lousy, stinking Gators, Gator Hater Countdown, 72 days from now. We'll see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And on video. Time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. Of course, R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. I'm also really excited. Our buddy Dari Payro from R.S. Andrews will be back with us for Go with the Flow again this year. Speaking of gambling and point spreads and everything like that, we'll be able to make our picks officially. First show here coming up the week of the games here. Can't wait for that. It'll be here really before you know it. So let's do this. Let's bounce through a few comments. We'll go Facebook first. We'll go YouTube after that. We'll be overall, we'll try to be a little bit quick today just because we got kind of a lot going on. So let's see if we can do that. Let me close out some of these windows and get back in here, and we'll see how everybody's doing. And you can tell me if I'm wrong, right? I mean, I said earlier, it's like people have a tendency to overrate this stuff, and we feel the emotion. I'm just as sad and disappointed as anybody. And I'm not going to tell you, pie in the sky, Georgia's going to just, move right through this like it never even happened. I'm not saying that either. What I'm saying is the results are no easier to predict because of the injuries. That someone who says, well, this guarantees the season is definitely over. I mean, when Jalen Waddle got hurt for Alabama last year, Devontae Smith shrugged that off and won the Heisman Trophy. Sometimes what looks like a debilitating injury ends up not being that way, and I think most of the gamblers and the analytics types, they assume that who's ever playing a position for Georgia, be it nickelback or tight end or whatever else, they assume it's a Georgia caliber player there in that spot. So do with that what you will, but that's kind of where I think things stand right now. Here's your comments over here for now. Matt Rugavina says JT Daniels is the key. His favorite targets last year were Burton and Kyrus, and both those guys are tip-top shape. Well, unfortunately, Burton and Kyrus did miss the last scrimmage, but it seems like they're on their way to being back for sure. Isaac Cruz says, I haven't been coming to Facebook first. Is that really true, Isaac? I didn't feel like that was true. Pretty soon we'll probably switch over to like the system that we use on like Thursday nights where we just have all the comments kind of dumped in the same spot. We'll probably do that eventually. We just haven't done that yet. Mike Tiffany has a great comment. This is 100% true. And by the way, Mike, thanks for sharing this show as well. I really appreciate that. He says JT needs to channel his inner Tom Brady and turn no-name players into stars. I think that's exactly a very reasonable request, right? That's what great quarterbacks do. That great quarterbacks have a way of making the people around them much better in the process, and Daniels will have a chance to do that this year. Bill Sanders says, always a great day to be a Gator hater, and that is certainly true. Shelton Tucker's still on the Carson Beck train, which you love to see, if nothing else for its consistency. Jermaine King says Moose was scared that BA would be mad at his Photoshop. Was that Moose Thames that did that? I thought that was pretty funny. I did ask Connor if it was okay if we used it. He said yes. Randy Glass, and I knew I would get some of this, and I'm here for it. It's fine. He says, love you, BA, but being too dismissive on this injury thing. Coming across as a little homer. You're right that one player may not make that big of a difference, but 5 to 7 key players and starters, you'd better rethink that one. Here's the thing, though, Randy, and you got to really hear what I'm saying and not hear what I'm not saying. I am not telling you that Georgia will be fine. I am telling you you can't predict that they won't. And you got to understand the difference on that. And I do feel like I made this pretty clear, that the game against Clemson wasn't easy to predict before this. Now, you may have some true Georgia homers or a homer for hire or something like that. You may have a true Georgia homer that's going to tell you, Georgia's going to beat Clemson by 27 points. You may have some of that kind of stuff. But the honest truth is that we haven't said that at any point in time to begin with. We've been telling you the entire time that the Clemson game for Georgia is very hard to win. It's also hard for Clemson to beat Georgia. It's a difficult game to predict. It's a narrow point spread. All I'm telling you is that the recent injuries that Georgia has sustained don't change that narrative. All of a sudden, it's not now easier to say, well, this just proves that Clemson's going to beat Georgia. We tried to lay out our case for when that is. So if you're hearing me say, I'm not worried about these injuries, Georgia's going to be fine. If that's what you're hearing me say, then I'm either poorly communicating or maybe you just missed the point that I'm making. I'm not telling you Georgia's going to be fine. Georgia had a bunch of injuries in 2020, and it turns out they weren't fine. I'm telling you that we can't predict now with certainty how it's going to play out on September 4th. If we could all be rich. We could bet $100,000 in the game. But even with these injuries, betting Clemson -3, most of you wouldn't bet a large sum of money on that, because the fact is that, people who follow this stuff from an analytics perspective and things like that, their assumption is going to be, take Darnell Washington on the field, Georgia still has a UGA quality tight end. Take Tyke Smith off the field, Georgia still has a UGA quality nickelback. Take Eric Gilbert off the field, Georgia still has a UGA quality whatever that's going to be. And you say, well, the talent level of those other guys is much higher. The people who do this for a living don't necessarily feel that way. You can believe me, you can believe them, or you cannot. But the one thing that I'm not telling you is Georgia's going to be fine. Georgia may still lose, but they may have still lost, even if all these players did play. So hopefully we're on the same page about that. Gerald Harmon says McConkey and Adonai Mitchell might be big difference makers this season. Yeah, I mean, I'm a lot more certain that Adonai Mitchell is likely to play. I mean, we've talked about this before. That I think at this point in time now, you have to assume that Adonai Mitchell is capable of playing for Georgia. Now, how well does he do year one? I won't make any predictions beyond that. But the fact that Mitchell, from word go in spring practice, had the look of someone who was ready to play for UGA, capable of being a part of the wide receiver rotation. That's actually, it's almost like getting a transfer player, right? Because I think most of us would have said 3-star recruit in the class of 2021 that his chance to impact at Georgia was going to be a couple of years down the road. To think that he's actually good enough that he might be able to play right now, regardless of how well he plays, how many catches that he gets, that's an extra player to use in a game that you may not know you're going to have, and that's a pretty big deal. McConkey has turned some heads too, and Terence Edwards gave a very, very nice description of McConkey's performance a moment ago. I think it still remains to be seen if that means that he's going to actually be a part of the wide receiver rotation. You can only play so many guys. But in the case of A.D. Mitchell, I feel pretty good in saying that he's probably going to play. Pharaoh Edmondson said the front seven is going to come alive against Clemson. I think Pharaoh brings up an interesting point, that if we say, well, J.T. Daniels' presence can help erase whatever issues you might feel like you have going on other places, the front seven has its own version of that too. Now we're talking about a collection of guys and not just one person, but front seven doing what front sevens do, sacking quarterbacks, getting in backfields for tackles for loss. All of a sudden, you do enough of that, all of a sudden you start to forget about who may be hurt. That's just a fact. Trevor Bates says JT has 2 full weeks to adjust and find who is going to step up and be his go-to guy. And we're really in that kind of portion of the season now, based on what Kirby Smart said in the past, where the practices really are now about Clemson, right? Prior to classes starting and some of the things like that, the practice more about a true camp, right? Working on yourself and doing those fundamentals and just getting better at football. Now, at least my assumption is based on some of the things that Smart has said in the past, all of a sudden now you're really working to, put in a game plan to go out and beat Clemson on September 4th. And Smart's always really careful to say, you don't want to do that too early, right? You can't, even if you got a big game like Clemson, you can't work on a week 1 opponent for a month. You just, kind of burn out after a while. More preparation doesn't make you better prepared. But we're in kind of that portion of the calendar now where my assumption is they're working pretty heavy on Clemson here at this point. Let's see what else. Let me go over to YouTube for a little bit, and I'll come back over here. On YouTube, Dallas Schwartz says, and good to see Dallas back in the comment section representing Southern California here. If you can only win one of these, who is more important, Clemson or Florida? Fight on. So it's obviously Florida because you got, first of all, you got the rivalry thing there, but you've also got the SEC East thing, right? It's like the game that would hurt Georgia to lose the most is Florida because, there's a chance that you could lose the division, right? The division's so weak that if you were to lose to Florida, you could lose the division. You could literally be on the outside looking in the SEC championship game. Florida's a losable game. It's a ranked opponent. Most teams can absorb one loss, but there's like one game on everybody's schedule that you almost can't afford to lose. And, that is Florida right now for Georgia. Forget the added emotion of it being a hated rival. It is also just the most important game Georgia plays. So I have been a believer now for months that the Clemson game is more important than some people give it credit for, and that's true on both sides. That the winner of this game stands to gain a lot. The loser of this game puts more at risk than has been commonly credited, but it still doesn't make it more important than the Florida game in my mind. Scott Green said, did Terence let it slip that it's toe injuries for Smith in Washington? I guess that chatter's been kind of out there. The honest truth is I really don't know. But he did say that. And, was that, Terence knowing for sure that's what that was, or just kind of what he heard on that? I mean, we do try to be careful to make sure we get all the facts correct here. But in some cases, when it comes to some of this injury stuff, sometimes the fog of war can kind of be what it is. And to use a phrase where, some things that get reported may later on you have to kind of, clean that up a little bit. So he did say that, and I guess there's, the chance that's what this is, but yeah. So I don't know exactly what that means, but you're right, Scott, that is what he said. Rhett Romack says stop the run, make him uncomfortable. Got plenty to win through the air and the ground with a stable of horses. They don't have horses back there, just a scat back. So Rhett feeling good about that game against Clemson coming up. A Dog Fan 3 in the subject of John Fitzpatrick. And listen, Fitzpatrick's played a lot of football for you right now. And Fitzpatrick is, a more reliable target than he's sometimes given credit for. And, Kirby Smart said this past Saturday that his absence from that scrimmage was one of the things that kind of slowed down the Georgia offense a little bit. So, you could have Gilbert, you can have Washington, but John Fitzpatrick's still going to play plenty. They're going to throw the ball to John Fitzpatrick too. So it's not like Fitzpatrick was going to be holding a clipboard or whatever tight ends do when they're not in the game. It's not like he was going to be doing that all season long. Had Washington and Gilbert been here, he was still going to be playing plenty, and he was going to be thrown to as well, and that's going to continue to be true. Breda Pest Management giving Nature Gator some hard time because Florida lost a recent recruit to UCF. Jay Shipes, this is probably this is probably over my head. He says the real problem with humanity is we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. I've never seen Jay be quite so philosophical, but maybe that is true. Scott Green says if they got stepped on and no breaks, they will play. Yeah, maybe so, but yeah, I mean, you certainly hope for the best outlook. And Kirby Smart said their prognosis is good, and we'll let Smart follow up on that and say some more on Saturday about that. Maybe he will give us some better news than we currently have related to all of that. Let's see what else. I agree with Scott Bolin on this. He says events like common football injuries should be addressed and acknowledged by the program so they don't become a distraction for the team. I think that Scott's right about this, that if you're in media, Georgia's media policy is something that really matters to you. And if you're not in media, you kind of don't really care about it all that much. You're not, who's talking to the reporters and, is it on Zoom or is it in person? The average fan just does not care about that kind of thing very much. But the point that Scott's making here is one that's at least worth considering, that while most fans are like, yeah, good, don't talk to the media, Scott actually brings up a point where talking to the media can be somewhat valuable. That if you try to keep everything so under wraps, then all you're doing is deputizing people to fan the flames of the rumor mill. And sometimes it's going to be true. In this case, I have to admit that I believe what has been commonly reported about Washington and Smith is likely more true than what Kirby Smart said in a statement yesterday. That's just my opinion. But other times, some of the stuff in the rumor mill is going to be completely false. As I told you on yesterday's show, what has been commonly reported, I shouldn't say reported, what has been commonly speculated about Eric Gilbert and why he's not playing right now, I think, and I am quite certain of this, that is false. And so when you don't speak up more, then you just deputize people to run with whatever rumor that you want to run with. And certain words when it comes to injuries are somewhat loaded. and it gets people fired up. And none of us are medical professionals, or at least I'm not a medical professional. You might be. We do have physicians that watch and listen to this show on a regular basis. But most of us, don't have a ton of experience with injury recovery and medical processes and things like that. And so it's easy for things to sound way different than they might actually be. We've also had people tell us before that, sometimes what an injury looks like is different than what it is. Bone bruise type of thing looks like the worst injury ever when it happens on the football field because the guy goes down in a heap, but later on he just sort of shakes it off. Whereas there are moments when a guy may tear an ACL and he walks off the field in his own power and it doesn't look that bad. That if Georgia was a little more forthcoming about this kind of stuff, it'd actually have the benefit of squashing rumors when they're not true. And I do think that Smart's obsession with secrecy actually hurts him oftentimes more than it helps him. He's not going to change just because I think that, but in this particular case, I think that Scott's actually making a pretty good point. HR Pickin' Stuff says that he's not as optimistic as I am. He's falling apart. Maybe I just didn't do a good job of conveying this. Y'all, there's a chance that Clemson beats Georgia by 17 points. There's absolutely a chance of that, and there's a chance that these injuries, are the kind of thing that gets cited later on. Certainly there'll be some Georgia fans that may make an excuse if it plays out that way. I'm not telling you that Georgia's going to shake all of this off and go right out there and like it never even happened. What I'm telling you is that analytics type people, gambling type people like that will not obsess over these injuries the way that Georgia fans will, because the assumption is that Georgia will have someone that steps up and plays at a UGA level. That before Darnell Washington got hurt, before Tyke Smith got hurt, that Georgia was still an underdog to beat Clemson. And that is remaining true now, even after these injuries. And the notion that somehow Clemson's going to be a 10-point favorite over Georgia because Georgia lost a nickelback and a tight end, that's just not likely to happen. If JT Daniels were to get hurt, then that obviously changes the outlook completely. But I think that for the most part, people overrate the impact of, individual injuries at positions like tight end, nickelback, and things like that. They matter, they're important, but they really don't change the overall projection for the game very much. Georgia is going to be a slight underdog in that game, much the same way they always have been. And as I said before, sometimes you're pleasantly surprised who steps in after an injury. Sometimes the worst case fear ends up being somewhat true, but we just can't know that right now. It's just an unknowable thing here at the moment. Let's see what else. DMart42 worried about left tackle right now. That's why when I ranked my player absences a little earlier, I do rank Warren Erickson's current injury for however long it lasts. I rank that number one on the recent list of guys who are not here. Erickson for me is the top one because if you do have to start Jamari Salyer at center, then you're taking Salyer away from a position he otherwise would have played. And the fact is, I assume that Erickson would play at a solid level at the center position, all SEC. I don't know, but certainly probably playing at a solid level there. And if you're replacing one solid starter with another, but you're moving someone from another position to do that, then your offensive line has just gotten weaker in the process. So, Washington I thought was really on the verge of a breakout season. Tyke Smith was an All-American a year ago, but I believe that Warren Erickson is the current injury for Georgia of the recent ones that matters the most. Let's see what else. Over here on Facebook for a moment. Chase Smith says the weird thing is that in the 18-hour period, we went from Washington and Smith are out 3 to 4 weeks to Smart saying they are day-to-day and now them having surgery. Yeah, so I think what some people are going to say is, and listen, this is where, I'm just going to let the reporters report what they report. I don't want to be a reporter. I don't want to vouch for anybody's reporting. I just want to talk about what people are reporting, right? That's the job. We all have a lane in life, and this is my lane, sitting in front of this microphone, speaking to this camera, and, spewing, occasional hot takes or whatever else. I think what some people are going to say is like what the definition of surgery is. I know we kind of get into almost like the Bill Clinton thing from the 90s, but what the definition of is, like what the definition of surgery is. There are different kinds of surgical procedures, right? There's the kind of surgery that's, very, very invasive and very, very serious and leads to a long, recovery process. But in modern medicine, there's a lot of, surgical procedures or things that by the letter of the definition count as a surgical procedure that don't lead to quite as much invasiveness and, quicker prognosis. And so I think some of the did they have surgery or not? And it's so weird that they're like two guys that have seemingly fairly similar situations. I think a lot of the did they have surgery or not kind of comes down to like what the definition of surgery really even is. And we've had smart medical type people on the show before. Maybe we'll have some on in the near future. Just what does it even mean? Surgery is a big loaded word, and does it mean the way that it seems? Because that's one of those things that feels like a ton of bricks dropping down on a table when you say that word. But in modern medicine, maybe it's not quite so invasive. And as far as Smart saying that the prognosis is excellent and it's day to day, we'll let him follow up on some of that on Saturday. But just be prepared for this idea of their day to day coming back any day now, and that to stretch out 3 to 4 weeks. You know what I'm saying? It's like it's one of those things where it feels like we've kind of been through that with Georgia before. Of they're getting better day to day, but that day to day process lasts for the amount of time that some folks suggested it. Kind of would be right now. So I guess just be somewhat prepared for the possibility that might be true. But I'm sure that Smart will clear some of that up. Matt Rukavina dropping some movie quotes in here. Tim Tatum saying definitely define injured. I guess this goes back to the hurt or injured thing a little bit too. Oh, wow. Congratulations. Santi Arnold says that Heather got into Alpha Phi sorority. That's awesome. That's such great news. Such great news. And I believe this may be one of our good friends here with a new Facebook handle. But that's really, really good news on that front there. Glad to hear that, Santiago. That's really, really happy to hear. Daniel Aldrich says he got his doctor's appointment, got to run. Thanks for the kind words, Daniel. Appreciate you being here. Isaac Cruz wondering about where things stand with George Pickens at this point in time. We don't even know about the guys who just got hurt yesterday, and the Pickens thing is still as much of an unknown as forever, I guess. Randy Hall said, how did Oscar Delp do last night? I don't know what his actual overall numbers were. The truth is I fell asleep on the couch watching the game. I'm calling the game tomorrow at Gainesville, but West Forsyth did pull away. Carver came out in the early stage of that game because this is a big mismatch in terms of 7A versus 3A. Carver's 3A. You had kind of a mismatch in classification, but Carver was really throwing some haymakers at the beginning of that game, and West Forsyth kind of pulled away there late. Also nice to see Jake Pope, the recent Alabama commit, and Kojo Antwi, the recent Ohio State commit. They were actually at the game, interviewed there at halftime. So a pretty big presentation and a nice celebration of what's going on with high school football. After our game on Friday, I'm doing Johns Creek in Gainesville. The North Cobb Buford game that night is going to be really good. And, of course, a lot of Georgia interest there with that North Cobb team. You've also got games coming up tonight there as well. All of it on Peachtree TV, streamed on CBS 46. So Delp, who really had a coming out party a year ago at the Corky Kell Classic, had another nice game yesterday. And the Wolverines there kind of pulled away in the second half against Carver. Chase Smith says, my new girlfriend is a Gator grad. How do I begin that conversation? Well, listen, maybe you can bring her over to the good guys here at some point in time. Gerald Harmon says Mays got rolled. They did. They had a lot of trouble getting to the stadium there. And Cherokee's really pretty good. That A.J. Swan, that quarterback for Cherokee's good, man. He's really good. And Mays, as I said before, they were late getting there. I guess they had awful traffic coming through Atlanta. I'll tell you this, though. Those Mays uniforms, if you saw the game, their uniforms are nice. They are nice. I love that color scheme. They're actually going to be a part of next weekend on we're doing the the big event there at Midtown High School next week, and May is going to be a part of that. Y'all got to check them out for their uniforms alone. That's a team that's had a lot of talent in recent years, but a good looking uniform there for Mays. Let's see what else. All right, back over to YouTube for 1 second, then we got to go. It's late. Anything else over on the YouTube side of things? JC, thank you for the kind words. I really appreciate that. William Perry says, if they are tuning out the outside noise, because we were talking about before about, how more forthcoming reporting from Georgia would eliminate some of the false rumors or whatever else. He says if they're tuning out the outside noise, then the rumors and stuff don't matter to them. And that's true. I do think, William, and maybe you'd agree with this, that tuning some of that kind of stuff out is actually easier said than done, especially when, in the case of what happened with Gilbert, where I do believe some verifiably false things were said that, that's the kind of thing that does weigh on you. As Terence Edwards said, it definitely weighs on the family there as well. It's one of the reasons why we love college football, at least I do. This is not the NFL. These are not guys I said before who are living in, some mansion at River Club, with no connection to the outside world. These are guys from your neighborhood, from your high school, from just down the road, that your, cousin's friend or whatever else. I mean, these are not, even in the name, image, likeness era, these are not gazillionaires who, drive around in a Maserati. These are guys that grew up very similar to the way that you did. And people say things about them. They're going to feel it. All right. We got to go. Good stuff all the way around. Thanks for being here as part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. You also make sure to check out the AJC there as well. More news concerning how the coronavirus impacting our state, policy, issues, the way that's being addressed, and kind of what all that means coming up next. Also some fascinating stuff going on in the political realm if you're interested in that kind of stuff. Always a good read at ajc.com for that. Braves staying hot, trying to do their thing here in the National League East. So good times all the way around. Y'all check out the Atlanta Journal-Constitution online, ajc.com for more. Falcons in Miami doing some joint practices with the Dolphins, getting ready for a preseason game. Interesting to see there. You probably see Felipe Franks maybe start that game. Probably won't see much of the other starters down there in South Florida, but getting close to the start of the NFL there too. So fun times. And y'all can check all of that out, Atlanta Journal-Constitution at ajc.com. Also, our friends at R.S. Andrews making the R.S. Andrews cool down possible. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. Did you know that if your water heater goes out, in many cases, R.S. Andrews can replace it for you the same day, but you've got to find them online at rsandrews.com. You'll have a great day. See you back here tomorrow, 10 a.m., DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. We'll look forward to speaking to you then.